Today, I'm sharing a story so brutal and unflinching, it shows what happens when an ordinary woman is forced to choose between obedience and survival in the merciless wilderness of the Old West. This is a land ruled by fire, dust, and men who believe power makes them untouchable. And it all starts with one refusal, a single act of defiance that sends a young woman fleeing into the desert and straight into a fate she never imagined. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Arizona sun had been relentless since first light, pounding the land with a blinding heat that bounced off stone and sand alike. By afternoon, the sky shifted to a burnished copper, and the wind awakened, dragging dust across the flats in twisting currents that clawed at the dying day. Arden Holt pulled her bonnet tighter beneath her chin, but it offered no mercy. The wind sliced through the cloth, flinging grit into her eyes and splitting her lips until they stung with blood. She had been walking since morning. Her boots were worn nearly through, soles cracked from weeks on the trail. The canteen at her side knocked hollow against her hip, empty since before noon. Every step grew heavier, her satchel biting into her shoulder like dead weight. Arden had come west with nothing except a fragile hope she could no longer feel. Back in Missouri, the Holt kin had pushed her toward a marriage she could not accept, an arrangement meant to erase debts, not build a life. She had refused, and for that choice, she was cast out. No home, no dowry, no place left at the table where she had been raised. When word reached her of an uncle living in Arizona, she believed it might be her last mercy. But upon arriving at Clearwater Junction, a scorched settlement barely clinging to existence, she learned the truth. Her uncle had been dead for 2 years, his homestead reduced to ash during a raid. She stayed one night at the saloon, spending her last coins on a stale plate and a narrow cot. The way the innkeeper watched her told her all she needed to know. If she remained, she would be traded like liquor across a bar. At first light, she gathered her satchel and stepped into the open desert, convinced she could reach Copper Bend, a settlement 2 days east. It was a foolish hope. By evening, the wind turned savage. Walls of dust rolled over the flats, swallowing the horizon whole. The sun dulled to a blood-red disk behind the storm. Arden coughed until her throat burned raw, her lungs aching as if filled with fire. The wind tore her bonnet free, and it vanished into the dust. Sand tangled in her hair, her knees buckled. Then she saw it. A rough ring of stones, the remains of an abandoned well. She collapsed beside it, clutching at the buried bucket. Dry. Nothing but dust. Her vision blurred as the light faded. A single thought surfaced through the haze. This is where I die. The desert would take her, and no one would ever speak her name again. Then a shadow fell across her. She blinked against the grit. A man stood there, solid and unmoving against the storm. Broad shoulders wrapped in deerskin. Long dark hair tied at the nape with a strip of leather. A rifle rested in his hands as naturally as breath. His face was carved by sun and wind, unreadable. Dark eyes studied her without haste. Arden tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. She lifted her empty canteen, shaking it weakly. The man knelt without a word. He drew a water skin from his belt and pressed it to her lips. She drank desperately, water spilling down her chin until he pulled it back with a firm grip. Enough, he said, his voice low, steady even through the storm. Too much, and you'll be sick. It was the first kindness she had heard in weeks. There was no softness in his tone, only certainty. His accent was unfamiliar, measured, deliberate. Fear flickered through her, but relief settled deeper. He scanned the boiling horizon, slung the rifle across his back, and without speaking, lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. She tried to protest, to say she could walk, but her strength was gone. Her head fell against his shoulder. Through the roar of sand and wind, she felt the calm rhythm of his breathing, the sure cadence of his steps. They reached a ridge where a half-built cabin stood sheltered by cottonwoods. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from a fire pit nearby. He pushed open the rough door with his shoulder and carried her inside, laying her gently on a cot made of pine poles and blankets. Arden blinked in the dimness. The cabin was plain and unfinished, but not wild. Tools hung neatly along the walls. A bow and quiver rested above the doorway. On the table lay strips of leather, half-shaped into reins and moccasins. Clay jugs sat near the fire, filled halfway with water. The air smelled of smoke and cedar. The man poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. This time she drank slowly, forcing her trembling hand to steady as she swallowed. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice torn raw by sand and thirst. He gave no answer. He took a stool by the wall, the rifle laid across his knees, and watched her while the storm howled outside the cabin. After a long stretch of silence, she spoke again. "My name is Arden Holt," she said quietly. "I'm from Missouri." The quiet lingered, heavy and unmoving. "You saved my life," she added. "I owe you." Time passed before he replied. "Vec." The name was brief and unadorned, fitting him as closely as skin. Arden gave a small nod, clutching her satchel against her chest. "I was headed for Copper Bend," she said. "I thought I could make it." Vec studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if measuring distance and truth together. 2 days on foot, he said. "You wouldn't have lasted the night." The bluntness cut sharper than the wind. Arden looked down at her torn dress, at the blisters splitting her hands. Once, she had been a merchant's daughter, raised in a house with polished floors and a piano in the parlor. Now she was a half-dead stranger hauled from the desert. Vec rose and crossed to the fire, stirring the coals and adding another log. In the glow, his features came into clearer shape, strong lines, younger than she had expected. Perhaps 30, though his eyes carried the weight of years far older. His silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. "You can stay until the storm passes," he said at last. "After that, you go." Arden's chest tightened. She had nowhere to go. No uncle, no safe road. And Cauldron Ash? The thought made her stomach clench. One of his men might already be searching for her. But how could she tell this man? Would he turn her out if he knew trouble followed her steps? "Thank you," she said instead, steadying her voice. "That will be enough." Even as the words left her, she knew they were untrue. The storm outside was only the beginning. She had crossed into a place where her past and his future were about to collide, where survival would demand more than borrowed mercy. And though she couldn't yet see it, the moment she collapsed beneath his shadow at the well, her life had already been set on a new course. The storm broke sometime in the night, leaving the land scraped bare by wind and sand. Morning arrived pale and brittle, the air sharp with smoke and dust. Arden woke beneath a coarse wool blanket, every muscle aching, but alive. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Raw timbers formed the ceiling above her, a single square window cut into the wall. The floor beneath her was packed earth. Then memory returned, the storm, the well, the shadow that carried her through the chaos. Vec was still there. He sat near the door, rifle resting across his knees. He hadn't slept. His dark eyes followed her as she stirred, but he offered no greeting. Outside, a lone bird called, thin and distant. Arden pushed herself upright. "I should thank you again," she said, her voice scraped from thirst. Vec inclined his head once. The silence pressed in around her, making her feel awkward beneath it. Back in Missouri, words had been armor, polite phrases, practiced courtesies. Here, they carried no weight. "I'll be moving on soon," she said, though her heart sank at the lie. Vec set the rifle aside and stood, moving with the slow, deliberate ease of a man shaped by quiet. "Where?" "Copper Bend," she answered. The words tasted hollow. He considered her. "2 days, if you know the land. Longer if you don't." "I've made it this far," Arden said, bristling at his tone. "You nearly died yesterday," he replied simply. She had no answer. Her hands twisted together in her lap. She had nowhere to go. No money, no protection. To admit it felt like exposing her throat to a hawk. Vec crossed to the table, lifting a strip of leather and working it through his hands. "The land isn't empty," he said after a moment. "It's watched. Claimed. Walk it alone, and you won't last. You'll be seen the way the land is. Something to be taken." Arden's breath caught. She knew he spoke the truth. Cauldron Ash's face flashed in her mind, the greedy eyes, the low voice that had cornered her at Clearwater Junction, whispering offers she had refused to hear. She had fled before his ash wardens could seal her fate. If he found her again. Vec's gaze snapped to her, sharp and searching, as if he'd caught the thought itself. "You're running from someone," he said. The truth struck Arden Holt hard, like a fist to the chest. She hesitated. Pride urged her to keep silent, but survival demanded honesty. "Yes," she said at last. "A man with money, with influence. He wants something I will not give." Vec's jaw tightened, though his expression barely shifted. He set the strip of leather aside and turned fully toward her. "Then you cannot go to Copper Bend," he said. His men watched the trails. The fire snapped softly between them. "The desert is wide," Vec went on, "but not wide enough to hide a woman alone." Arden's throat dried. "Then what choice do I have?" Vec met her gaze without wavering. Firelight caught in his eyes, and for the first time she sensed something beneath the stone. Old weight, carried for many years. "I have a claim to this land," he said. "My grandfather lived here before the soldiers came. The government says I must prove it. That means living here, building, making it a home." He gestured toward the unfinished cabin around them. "Alone, my claim is weak. With a wife, the law cannot dismiss it." The words reached her slowly, like distant thunder rolling across hills. "A wife?" Vec did not look away. "On paper only," he said evenly. "I will not touch what is not freely given." The fire hissed. "The law sees a woman beside me, and the land is mine. In return, you have shelter, food, protection. When your danger passes, you are free to leave." Arden's heart hammered. Marriage, to a stranger, to an Apache man, was unthinkable. Back in Missouri, it would have ruined her name beyond repair. But Missouri lay 1,000 miles behind her. Here in the Arizona Territory, names and reputations carried little weight. Survival carried everything. She looked down at her torn dress, at the blisters split across her palms. Alone, she was nothing more than dust waiting to scatter. With him, she might endure. "You ask a great deal," she whispered. Vec's gaze held hers, unmoving. "I offer a great deal," he replied. "I will not ask twice." Her chest tightened. The choice before her felt impossible. To accept such an arrangement was madness, but the desert had nearly taken her, and Cauldron Ash's shadow still followed her steps. At last, she lifted her chin. If I agree, there will be conditions. Vec inclined his head. Speak them. I will have my own room, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Done. I will have a fair say in how we live here, how the household is kept. Reasonable. And if the time comes, if I choose to leave, you will not stop me. For a long moment, his eyes darkened. Something old flickered there. Pain, perhaps, or memory. She feared he might refuse. Then he spoke. I will not hold what does not wish to stay. He paused. But I do not make promises lightly. Marriage, even in name, is no small thing. Nor is survival. Silence settled between them, heavy as the desert night. At last, Vec stepped back, as if marking the boundary they had drawn. Then it is settled, he said. Arden exhaled in a trembling breath. She felt trapped and freed all at once, like someone who had leapt from a cliff and found wings mid-fall. Outside, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving. Inside those rough walls, a bargain had been forged, binding two strangers across culture, history, and loss. An alliance born not of love, but necessity. Yet as Arden lay back on the cot, her heart refused to quiet. In the steady weight of Vec's eyes, she had seen more than survival. She had seen a man fighting to hold his place in a world determined to erase him. And perhaps, in his struggle, she might claim her own. After the storm, the desert softened, as if ashamed of the violence it had unleashed. Days turned blistering hot, nights sharp with cold. The sky stretched endless above them, blue by day, jeweled with stars by night. In that vast stillness, Arden and Vec began the uneasy work of living side by side. The cabin carried the scent of cedar and smoke, the floor rough beneath Arden's boots. At first, every creak of timber, every stretch of silence between them, felt heavy. She had grown up amid constant noise, merchants arguing, sisters laughing, piano keys ringing through open rooms. Here, words were scarce, spent only when needed. Vec spoke little, and never without purpose. His quiet felt like a wall she could not climb, but necessity stripped away pretense. The first morning, Arden attempted to cook from the few supplies he kept, cornmeal and dried venison. The result was thick, heavy, nearly inedible. Vec ate without complaint. His expression told the truth, though his words were simple. You can do better. I suppose I'll have to, she replied, stung but determined. By the third morning, she managed a pan of cornbread that filled the cabin with warmth. Vec said nothing, only nodded once, but she noticed he took a second piece. It was victory enough. Each dawn, when Vec stepped out with his rifle slung across his back, Arden Holt watched him from the porch. He moved with a quiet precision that seemed carved from the land itself, every stride balanced, every motion soundless. Some days, he hunted. Other days, he worked the skeleton of the cabin, hauling logs and setting beams with a strength that appeared unending. Arden tried to help, though her palms split and blistered until they bled. You're not built for this, he told her once, noticing her torn hands. I'm not built to be useless either, she snapped back. He studied her then, not unkindly, as if seeing her anew. From that day on, he gave her smaller tasks, shaping wooden pegs, mixing mud for chinking, repairing leather straps. The work steadied her. It gave her something solid to push against, something to earn. In return, she began teaching him letters. At first, he refused. Marks on paper won't stop a bullet, he said. No, she answered, but they can stop a man from losing his life. That gave him pause. He agreed. In the evenings, by firelight, She traced words onto rough parchment. Land, claim, cabin. His hand, unused to holding a pen, moved stiffly at first, but his eyes never left the page. There was a patience in him deeper than any she had known. Within weeks he could sign his name. Steady, clear, unmistakable. When she praised him one night, he shrugged. "A name on paper doesn't change who I am." She looked at him across the fire. "No," she said softly, "but it proves what you already are. A man with a place. A man who belongs." For the first time, she saw something shift in his eyes. Not pride, exactly, but something close. Something earned. Still, their lives did not always fit cleanly together. Their habits clashed. Arden folded clothing into neat stacks. Vec left his belongings where they fell. She wanted to scrub the floor until it felt like a home. He said dust was part of living, not something meant to be defeated. Once, when she tried to move a hunting spear from the doorway, he snapped, sharp and sudden. "Don't touch what you don't understand." The words cut deep. She withdrew to the far side of the cabin, anger burning in her chest. Later that night, his voice came softer. "That spear is older than me," he said. "My father made it. I keep it there so I don't forget." She listened, shame washing over her. "I didn't know." "You couldn't," he replied. "Now you do." Slowly, their worlds began to meet at the edges. One night, Arden told him about her father's business back east, the collapse that drove the Holt kin into desperation, the marriage they tried to force upon her. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Vec listened without interruption, his face unreadable. At last, he said, "You chose freedom. That choice has a cost. You're paying it." He paused. "But you're alive." The word struck her harder than she expected. Alive. As summer faded, the nights turned cold. They slept apart, as agreed. Yet the walls of the cabin seemed to draw them closer all the same. Once, when coyotes howled near the trees, Arden woke shaking. Vec rose, fed the fire, and kept watch until dawn. He said nothing, but she noticed how he placed his rifle within easy reach of her bed. Another day, she slipped while fetching water from the creek. As she slid toward the bank, Vec caught her wrist and pulled her upright with a strength that stole her breath. For a heartbeat, they were close, his grip firm, her pulse racing. She saw something in his eyes she could not name. He released her at once, stepping back as though distance were armor. Weeks passed, and routine bound them together. Dawn to dusk filled with labor. Dusk to night spent in silence, or in words few but honest. Arden learned to ride the small dun mare tied near the cottonwoods. Vec taught her how to listen for water beneath stone, how to read the tracks of deer and coyote. In return, she showed him how to keep accounts in a ledger, how to measure stores so nothing went to waste. One evening, as the fire burned low, Arden lifted a small harmonica she had carried all the way from Missouri. She played a tune, rough and wavering from neglect, yet it filled the cabin with a quiet softness that tightened her throat. Vec watched her, his expression unreadable. "That's a good sound," he said quietly. "It reminds me of home," she whispered. He glanced around the half-built cabin, the bare walls, the desert pressing in beyond them. "Is this not home?" Her answer caught in her throat. At last, she said, "Not yet." He nodded, as if he understood more than she could say. And so the days turned. What began as necessity slowly, almost against their will, became something more, a shared rhythm, a fragile trust, but a real one. Arden no longer felt like a stranger inside the cabin. She belonged to the work, to the silence, and to the bond growing quietly between them. Though neither of them spoke it aloud, Both understood the truth. What they had forged out of desperation was shifting into something far more dangerous and far harder to define. The first warnings were quiet, almost invisible, like crows circling high against a clear sky. One morning, Vec found boot prints near the creek. Too deep, too careless to belong to him. Another evening, the mare grew skittish, ears snapping toward the shadows beyond the cottonwoods. Arden Holt noticed the change in him, the way his shoulders stayed tight, the way his rifle never left his reach, the way his gaze kept drifting toward the horizon, even as they ate in silence. Once, she asked, "Are you expecting someone?" "The desert has many eyes," he said, and left it there. But she already knew. The memory of Clearwater Junction clung to her like smoke. Caldron Ash was not the kind of man who let go of what he believed belonged to him. Arden feared the day his reach stretched this far. That fear took shape one late afternoon when a rider appeared along the ridge. Arden was tending the fire when she heard the hoofbeats, heavy, confident, unhurried. She froze. Vec stepped outside, rifle in hand, his stance calm but coiled. The rider was broad-shouldered, wrapped in a fine coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His horse was sleek, restless, well-fed. Before he spoke, Arden knew. "Well now," Caldron Ash drawled as he reined in near the cabin. "Didn't expect to find you this far from town, Miss Holt." His eyes swept over her, lingering too long, then shifted to Vec. And in the company of a savage, no less. Arden's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "You have no business here, Mr. Ash." Ash laughed softly, the sound cold as iron. "Everything west of Clearwater is my business, especially runaway property." Vec didn't move. "This land is mine," Ash sneered. "Government might disagree, but maybe there's a simpler solution." He tilted his head toward Arden. "Hand over the girl, and I'll forget I ever saw this place." Arden's stomach turned. She opened her mouth, but Vec spoke first, his voice level and unshaken. "She's my wife." The words dropped between them, heavy as heat. Arden's heart faltered, though she knew it was true, on paper. Ash's smile twisted. "A wife?" He chuckled. "That's rich. A Missouri girl playing squaw. You think a piece of paper will hold up in court? You think folks will choose you over me?" Vec lifted his rifle just enough, not aiming, but unmistakable. For a long, taut moment, Ash's gaze flicked between them. Then he laughed, sharp as a whip crack. "The law bends for men like me," he said. "We'll see how strong your little marriage is when I'm finished." He wheeled his horse and rode off, dust boiling behind him. Arden sagged against the doorframe, her legs unsteady. Vec lowered the rifle, his face carved from stone. "He'll be back," she whispered. "Yes." That night, Arden couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the beams overhead, listening to the fire settle, to the slow rhythm of Vec's breathing across the room. At last, she rose and sat near the hearth, shadows stretching long across her face. "You knew this would happen?" she said quietly. Vec opened his eyes. He hadn't been asleep. Ash isn't the first man to want what isn't his. Arden studied him. In the firelight, he seemed both younger and older, young in the strength of his body, old in the weight behind his eyes. "What did you mean?" she asked. "When you spoke about court, about the law bending?" Vec's jaw tightened as if weighing the words. At last he spoke. "My father built here 20 years ago. He raised walls, planted corn, proved the land." His voice was flat, worn smooth by repetition. "When the soldiers came, they burned it down, said the papers were lost, said we had no claim." The fire popped, sparks lifting like stars. Ash's father was there, Vec went on. He took what he couldn't earn. Now the son has come to finish the theft. Arden's throat tightened. She saw it then, the wound beneath the scar. This wasn't just about land. It was about erasure, about a fight carried across generations. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Vec shook his head. Sorry doesn't change the past. He looked at her then, sharp and unyielding. You need to understand. This isn't only survival. This is justice. If I lose this land again, he continued, my father's fight dies with me. The truth settled heavy in Arden's chest. She had thought their bargain was for shelter, a roof against the desert. But it was more than that. She had stepped into a battle that had begun long before her arrival, one that would not end easily. In the days that followed, the tension thickened. Twice more, Vec found signs near the creek. Boot prints pressed deep into the mud, the smell of a spent cigar carried on the wind. Someone was watching. And the desert was no longer quiet. Once, Arden found a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush near the creek. After that, she kept the rifle close, even though her hands trembled each time she wrapped her fingers around the stock. At night, when coyotes cried and the wind pressed against the cabin walls, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. And yet, whenever she looked at Vec, steady, unyielding, rooted like bedrock, something inside her refused regret. One evening, as they patched the cabin roof, she finally asked the question she had been carrying. If Caldron Ash comes back, she said, if he brings men, what will you do? Vec set the hammer aside, his gaze fixed on the far horizon. I will stand. And if standing means dying, she asked. He looked at her then. For the first time, the hardness in his face softened, just a fraction. Then I will die where my father lived, he said. But I don't think Ash expects me to stand with a wife beside me. The word wife struck her again, sharp and unsteady. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said quietly, He underestimates you. She paused. And me? Vec's eyes lingered on her, unreadable. Then he turned back to his work, but the air between them had changed. That night, as Arden lay awake, listening to the desert's restless breathing, she understood the truth. Their bargain was no longer only about survival. It was about belonging, about choosing to fight, not just for land or name, but for each other. The shadows of the past gathered on the horizon. Arden felt a new strength stir in her chest, her own, not borrowed, not forced. The days after Ash's visit felt like waiting for a storm that refused to break. The desert looked calm, the sky wide and blue, but every movement Vec made carried tension. He kept the rifle loaded, a knife at his belt, his eyes never still. Arden felt it too. When she walked to the creek, she swore she heard branches snap where no deer stood. At night, the silence felt heavy, as if it were listening. Even the coyotes grew scarce. One evening, Vec returned from scouting the ridges with his jaw tight. 3 men, he said. Ashes. They were watching. Arden's stomach clenched. What do we do? We prepare. She searched his face. For what? His gaze didn't waver. For war. They worked faster than ever. By day, they cut timber, sealed cracks with mud, and braced the door with heavy beams. By night, they stacked supplies close: water, dried meat, ammunition. Arden's hands blistered, her muscles burned, but she didn't complain. If the cabin was to be their shield, she would help build it with her own strength. Vec taught her how to use the rifle. Patient, firm. Hold steady, breathe. Don't fear the kick. It's only wood and iron. The first time she fired, the shot went wide. Birds exploded from the trees. Arden cursed under her breath. Vec said nothing. He adjusted her grip, his hand steadying hers. The second shot sent a tin can clattering from the fence post. A smile pulled at her lips before she could stop it. Vec gave a single nod. By the end of the week, Arden could load and fire without shaking. She prayed she would never need to. Still, some part of her felt proud. She was no longer the helpless girl who had collapsed in the desert. The attack came 3 nights later. The air was dry. The moon hung thin and pale. Arden woke to the smell of smoke. At first, she thought she was dreaming. Then Vec was beside her, gripping her shoulder. "Up," he whispered. His voice was calm, but urgent. Her heart slammed as smoke curled through the cracks in the walls. Vec eased toward the door and peered through a narrow gap. "They're here," he said. Arden's chest tightened. "How many?" 4. Ash with them. Through the opening, she saw fire licking at the corral fence. Men carrying torches moved toward the cabin. Ash's voice drifted on the wind. "Burn them out. I'll see this land turn to ash, same as his father's." Vec's jaw hardened. He looked at Arden. "Stay low. Don't open the door unless I fall." "No." The word surprised her. "I won't hide. If this is our fight, it's mine too." For a moment, their eyes locked. Then Vec gave a short nod. "So be it." The first torch struck the wall. Flames crawled up the logs. Vec kicked the door open, rifle raised. His shot split the night. One of the ash wardens fell. His torch dropped into the dirt. Shouts erupted. Horses screamed. Arden grabbed the water bucket and threw it against the burning wall. Her arms shook, but she kept moving. The fight had begun. Another torch came flying through the window and landed near the bed. Arden Holt crushed it beneath her boot, choking as smoke filled her lungs. Outside, gunfire ripped through the night. Vec fired, worked the action, and fired again, his movements calm, measured, steady as breath. Arden dropped beside him, her fingers clumsy as she fed cartridges into his hand. He didn't look at her, but when she pressed the rifle back into his grip, his fingers brushed hers. Brief, wordless acknowledgement. Caldron Ash's voice roared through the chaos. "Come out, Vec! You can't stand against me. The law's on my side." "The land is mine," Ash shouted again. "Burn or crawl. It ends tonight." Vec answered, his voice hard as stone. "This land is my father's. My blood is in it. You will not take it." A shot slammed into the doorframe, splintering wood. Arden flinched, then steadied herself. She lifted the second rifle, breath locked tight in her chest. Through the smoke, a figure rushed forward, torch raised high. She aimed and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped hard. The torch scattered sparks across the dirt. Arden's hands shook, her ears rang, but the cabin still stood. Vec glanced at her for a heartbeat. In his eyes, she saw recognition, not of fear, but of strength. The fight raged on. Flames licked at the walls. Smoke burned their eyes. Then Caldron Ash himself charged from the darkness, pistol flashing, his face twisted with rage. Vec met him head-on. The rifle was empty, but his body was unyielding. They collided in the dirt, fists and fury tangling beneath the desert moon. Arden's heart seized. She grabbed the empty rifle and swung it hard at a man lunging toward her. The blow sent him sprawling. She turned just in time to see Ash drive Vec to the ground, a knife glinting in his hand. "Your father died with nothing," Ash spat, "and you'll join him tonight." Arden screamed. Without thinking, she snatched the pistol lying in the dirt, raised it, and fired. The shot split the night. Ash froze, shock etched across his face. Then he collapsed beside the flames. Silence followed. broken only by the hiss of burning wood. The remaining ash wardens fled into the darkness, their shouts fading with the wind. Vec pushed himself upright, chest heaving. Arden dropped the pistol, her hands trembling. He looked at her, firelight sharp in his eyes. "You saved me," he said quietly. Arden swallowed, her throat raw. "We saved each other." By dawn, the fire was out. The cabin bore its wounds, blackened walls, a scorched roof. But it still stood. Arden leaned against the doorway, exhaustion weighing her down, soot streaking her face. Vec stood beside her, watching the sun climb over the desert. "This isn't finished," he said softly. "Ash had money, men. Others may come." Arden turned to him, her voice steady despite the ache in her body. "Then let them. I won't run again." Vec studied her. For the first time, the hardness in his expression eased, replaced by something unguarded. He reached out, his hand brushing hers, calloused, warm, real. In the quiet of the burned-out dawn, Arden understood the truth. What had begun as a bargain had become a bond, not just shelter, not just survival, but something forged in fire. The desert morning rose gray with smoke, the horizon blurred as if the night itself mourned. Arden stood in the doorway of the scarred cabin, her dress singed at the hem, her hands raw from hours of hauling water and stamping embers. Her body trembled with exhaustion. Still, the cabin stood, damaged, wounded, but standing, just as they were. Vec returned from the ridge, rifle slung across his back. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, streaked with soot and blood. He had gone to be certain the last of Ash's men were gone. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes sweeping the cabin, then her. "They won't be back soon," he said, his voice hoarse but sure. Arden nodded. She didn't ask how he knew. The answer was written in his face. Ash was dead, his men scattered. For now they were safe. The word felt strange on her tongue. She hadn't felt it in months, perhaps years. Vec stepped past Ardenholt into the cabin, his palm sliding along the charred wall as if measuring what had survived. "We rebuild," he said. Arden's throat tightened. She had expected talk of leaving, of abandoning this ground soaked in fire and hatred. But his answer was the same as it had always been. To stand, to endure. "Yes," she said quietly. "We rebuild." The days that followed were filled with labor. Together they pulled down the worst of the burned beams, patched the roof, sealed the walls. Arden's hands blistered, her arms burned with pain, but she worked beside Vec without complaint. At night they collapsed onto the floor, too exhausted even to speak, listening to the low hum of the desert around them. Once, neighbors from a nearby Apache camp came, silent, watchful. They brought poles for the roof and left with few words. An old woman pressed her palm against Arden's cheek, eyes sharp as a hawk's, before turning away. Arden couldn't tell if it was a blessing or a warning. From town came whispers carried by travelers, Keldrin Ash's name cursed, his dealings exposed. Some said he had finally met the justice he deserved. Others muttered that the Apache had killed him in cold blood. Arden knew the truth, but truth was fragile in the West, bent by power and prejudice. Vec didn't chase rumors, he built. Every log he set, every nail he drove, was his answer to the world. Arden found herself matching his rhythm, letting her strength echo his. Weeks after the fire, they sat on the porch, rebuilt from salvaged wood. The evening air was cool, the desert stretching gold and red beneath the sinking sun. Arden turned the harmonica in her hands. "It almost feels like a home," she said softly. Vec watched the horizon. "It is a home," he replied. "Ours." Her breath caught. The word was simple, yet it carried more weight than any vow spoken before a preacher. She lifted the harmonica and played a slow tune her mother used to hum while mending clothes. The notes drifted into the open air, gentle and aching. When she finished, she found Vec watching her, his gaze unreadable but not unkind. "I haven't heard music like that since I was a boy," he said. "I hoped it might remind you of something better," Arden answered. He was quiet for a moment. "It reminds me that not all is lost." The words settled deep. She looked at this man of few words, who had carried her through a storm, fought beside her in fire, and now raised a life from ash, and realized she no longer thought of her stay as temporary. "Vec," she whispered, "when we first made this bargain, I meant to leave. When it was safe. When I could." Her voice faltered, but she met his eyes. "Now I find I don't want to." For the first time, his expression broke, lips parting, eyes narrowing with something close to surprise. "And if I asked," he said slowly, "not for a bargain, not for safety, but for truth, would you stay then?" Her heart thundered. "Yes," she breathed. "For truth, I would stay." He reached for her hand, slow as dawn. His calloused fingers wrapped around hers, firm yet gentle. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full, fragile, and fierce all at once. Seasons turned. The cabin grew solid. A second room was added. Fields near the creek were cleared for planting. Arden learned to coax beans from the soil, to tend chickens scratching in the dust. Vec taught her to write more surely, to hunt with bow as well as rifle. Their bond deepened, unspoken, yet unmistakable. When she laughed, rare but bright, he watched with softened eyes. When he returned from hunting, worn and sunburned, she set water before him without a word. Their lives braided together like roots beneath the earth. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, Arden thought of Missouri, the wide porch, the piano in the parlor, the Holt kin who had cast her aside. It felt like another lifetime. Here, in this scarred but steadfast land, she had found something she never had before. Choice. She had chosen this place, chosen this man, chosen herself. The day came when a government inspector rode out, ledger in hand, Orrin slate. He examined the cabin, the fields, the animals. He asked questions, made notes, watched them with the cautious eye of a man who weighed worth in ink. Vec stood tall, Arden at his side. "And this is your wife?" the inspector asked. Vec's hand closed around hers, steady and sure. "Yes," Arden said firmly. "I am." The inspector nodded, scribbled, and closed the book. "Looks like the claim is solid. Keep at it, and the land will be yours." When he rode away, Arden released a shaky breath. Vec squeezed her hand once, then let go. But the warmth remained. That evening they walked to the creek beneath a sky ablaze with sunset. Arden knelt, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "My father dreamed of this," Vec said after a long silence. "A home, a place that couldn't be taken. I thought it was lost." He stopped, the words heavy. Arden rose, her dress brushing the grass. "Now it's found," she said softly. He looked at her then, sunset fire reflected in his eyes. "Found with you." Her heart swelled. She stepped closer without thinking. He bent his head, and their lips met, tentative at first, then sure, carrying all that had been built in silence and fire. When they parted, the desert lay still beneath the vast sky. For the first time, Arden felt not like a wanderer clinging to chance, but like a woman rooted in land she could claim as her own. Vec took her hand again. "We are home," he said, and she knew it was true. The cabin, the creek, the wide, unforgiving desert. All of it was theirs, not given, not borrowed, not taken, but made with sweat, courage, and a love grown fierce and unshakable. A home of their own. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.